Let's see if you want me to unmute.
Hey, everybody.
Hey, Steve.
Uh-oh. Here's the feedback.
I am. Tony, have you, Tony. I'm sorry, did you hear me? You're
Steve?
muted. Yeah.
Hi, did you say something? I'm sorry, didn't hear you.
Have you heard from Stu?
You can hear me there? With your headphones on, you can hear me? Okay. You can hear me?
There's Val.
You found Val?
Yep.
What about Stu?
Stu's here.
Okay. And
Are you expecting any more planning board members or?
let me get back to Zoom. Excuse me for a minute.
I'm in, but I'm having some
Val.
issues. I can hear you.
Okay, good.
Oh, there's Jamie Bruton.
Jamie Bruton is coming. I just got an email from Sarah Morris, who is not going to be able to join us tonight. And Ted Seeley is not available to join us tonight. I haven't heard from Mikal.
He's here.
Okay. And
Okay, I'm coming through.
What about Jane Ford, Diane? Is Jane-
haven't heard from her, but we've been keeping her in the loop. She was at last night's meeting, and we, mentioned that we did have tonight's meeting. So sometimes she's late because she runs into traffic on the way home. Oh, there's Mikal.
Yep.
And John.
The Newmarket Town Council and the Planning Board. And we can start, as always, with the Pledge of Allegiance. I think. I pledge allegiance
It's to the flag,
of the United States.
United States of America,
and
to the republic for which it stands, one nation,
under God,
indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. So this is a little awkward over Zoom, but we have had these meetings now. This is since I've been on the council, I think we've done one every year, at least certainly in recent years. And one of the things that's nice is that we always have changing members, and so I think it's important to introduce ourselves. And obviously we can't go around the table, and everyone's screen is a little different. So
Madam,
yeah, go. Oh, do you
Madam
need me to start?
Chair,
Sorry.
before the statement, the chair of the town council, due to the COVID-19 crisis and in accordance with the Governor Sununu's emergency order number 12 pursuant to executive order, determined that the town council and planning board is authorized to meet electronically. Please note that observe and listen contemporaneously to this meeting, which was authorized order. However, in accordance with the emergency order, this is our A, providing public additional access possibilities by video or other electronic means. We are utilizing by meeting. All members of the council and planning board have the ability to communicate contemporaneously meeting through the Zoom platform. When the public has access to contemporaneously in this meeting through dialing the following phone number: 1-646-5656 and access code 911-702, or by clicking the following web address: www.gov, and it's also on channel 13 locally. We're information for accessing the meeting, and we previously gave notice to the public how to access the meeting using Town of Newmarket's website at newmarketnh.gov. And we're providing a mechanism to the public body during the meeting if there's problems with the access. If anybody has a problem, 659-367-1321 in adjourn to access the meeting. Just to let the public know that accessing the meeting does not mean access, but there's a system-wide failure. In the event that the public is unable to access the meeting, we will adjourn the meeting and have it rescheduled. Please note that all votes, if there are any votes going to be taken, and we do need to do attendance, and I've got a message that, so I'd ask the chair to ask all the planning board and council members present, and if they're in the room by themselves.
Sorry, I can start with the council. I'm just going to go in the order that I see people. So there's no particular order here, but Councillor Blackstone, if you're present, and whether or not there's anyone there with you. And you need to unmute yourself to do.
Yeah, I know I'm having trouble getting the thing to click. Yes, I'm present and I'm by myself.
Thank you. Councillor Sanders.
Present and alone.
Councillor Burns.
Present and alone.
Councillor Braybeck.
Present and alone.
And Councillor Dumont.
Present and alone.
And Councillor Kuiper.
Alone.
Thank you. I don't know, Eric, if you want to do the same for the planning board, maybe?
Yes, I'll do that. Thank you. Mikhail Zahorik,
Present on my own.
Val Shelton,
Here. And alone.
Jamie Bruton,
Here and alone.
and I don't see any other planning board members on my screen, so I'm Eric Bodeman. I'm here and by myself also. Thank you.
Thank you. And I should say I'm Tony Weinstein, and I'm also here and alone. I've even kicked my dogs out of the room. So, and I think those probably suffice for our introductions. Again, it's kind of challenging to do introductions. It's not like we can go around the table, but at least we can see each other's faces and have a sense of who's serving on the planning board and who's serving on the town council at this point, and to help foster our dialogue as we move forward. And then I think we can just kind of jump into the agenda if there are no other objections. And the first item on our agenda is a public forum. So is there anyone from the public who wishes to speak tonight? The chance to unmute yourself and speak up.
Madam Chair, my understanding is that the agenda is going to include some discussion of the accessory apartment ordinance. And I wonder if discussion, when that point of the discussion comes up.
No, this would be the opportunity for public comment would be now.
Okay. Then what I'd like to say, if I can, is I'm not 100% certain exactly what the scope of the discussion is tonight with respect to the accessory zoning ordinance. My understanding is that there is a general concern, and maybe there are specific concerns with affordable housing, given the current state of the market where prices are skyrocketing and things are flying off the market rapidly. I'm speaking with some experience with the accessory zoning ordinances. I've chaired the Newmarket Zoning Board of Adjustment for far longer than any. I don't speak on behalf of the ZBA. The ZBA doesn't have a position, but my personal view is that the accessory apartment ordinance allows accessory apartments in existing single-family residences or existing residences, a single accessory apartment attached to or part of an existing structure by special exception has been, in my personal view, working fairly well. It's been my experience and view based on 25 years or so living in town and having served the town in a variety of capacity over the years. And just being around is that the town has already a very diverse mix of different kinds of housing of all kinds. And I don't know exactly what the intentions are with respect to the accessory apartment ordinance or otherwise. My personal view is that the council should proceed with great caution. The purpose, as I have interpreted and understood the ordinance, is and the restrictions that are placed on it, meaning that the accessory apartment has to be part of an existing structure or attached to an existing structure, is to prevent what would essentially amount to a property while evading the requirements of the subdivision ordinance. So we typically, the ZBA has typically rejected and taken a very dim and restrictive view of attempts to place accessory apartments in detached structures and separate structures on residential property in order to respect the limitations, in order to respect the necessity of the subdivision ordinance and to prevent a kind of development that we regard as contrary to, or I personally regard as contrary to, the letter and spirit of the master plan. So again, any loosening of the restrictions that are in the ordinance are being contemplated, I would urge the council to proceed with great caution in that respect, and to be very careful what you wish for. So I don't know if this is helpful at all, if it's in the context of your discussion at all, but I wanted to offer that perspective, and I'm happy to answer any questions that anybody may have.
Thank you. And I don't know exactly what the nature of the discussion will be, but I think that it has been, it was exactly that, about the detached accessory dwelling units as opposed to the current policy that we have. So
if I can, I mean, the subdivision ordinance exists for a reason, and to allow it to be defeated or evaded by means of a special exception in the jurisdiction of the ZBA, it's not really part of the core function of the ZBA, in my opinion. And I think that there are very, very good policy reasons, in my personal opinion, for the ordinances, the subdivision and zoning ordinance, to be the way it is. And I'd be very hesitant and reluctant to see a major upset in that structure without an awful lot of careful thought, because you could rapidly change the complexion of the town in ways that are not easily anticipated. And one law that remains in effect at all times, in my experience, is the law of unintended consequences. So I just urge caution and careful consideration.
thank you. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm not seeing any other public comment. So I will go ahead and move on. And so the next item that we have is under new business. And so the first item under new business is our PowerPoint presentation by Arnett Consultants on the Gateway Initiative and recommendations. So I will turn it over.
You want me to
Sure.
kick it off?
Or to Steve, yes.
We'll try this. I keep getting that my internet connection is unstable. So what happened was the council had for goal review and try to come up with some ideas on how we can redevelop. And what we say by gateway is the North Main Street, Route 152, Exeter Road. And really do next and try to redevelop and encourage development in those areas. Hired Stu Arnett and to some years with the town planner Diane Hardy, myself, stakeholders, and now we have some of our findings at this time. So I'm going to turn this over to Steve. My mic. So I think it's just maybe it's the number of members on tonight with our cameras. Stu, you there?
You are cutting in and out, Steve.
Yeah, Stuart's here. Can people hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay. And it looks like I'm sharing my screen. So you're getting a picture of Newmarket, hopefully, and not yours truly. Good. Well,
Right.
Hopefully you saw for long enough that I had a button-down shirt and a jacket on, and I'm actually at a sort of a real office, and crazy times, crazy presentations. But thanks for letting me get a few minutes here. Chairs and members. This is my third time to be back in front of your joint meeting, and some of you may remember Bill Flynn and I were here last year. I was 2 years ago, and then this would be our third. And before I go into the thing, I just want to again thank the town for allowing us to be part of the whole envisioning of making Newmarket a better place and having a better future. If I haven't already, I'm going to turn off my video and tell me if that doesn't, you can still see the slide?
Yes.
Good. Okay. So you don't have to, no one has to see me and they can see the slide. Again, great help from Diane and Steve the last year. We had 8 or 9 presentations to different property owners and other interest in the different areas. The presentation tonight, don't anybody hang up when I say this, is 35 slides, but I'm going to go through them real fast, believe it or not. And it's probably 40% of all the work we did, because this is a combination of the 3 reports. So if anybody wants to drill down more, we'd be happy to follow up. And looking forward to a great year ahead. I'm 7 months out of haven't been there for in person like a lot of people for several months. So if I'm saying something that's a little bit dated, that's the reason. But hopefully, otherwise, we can give you something to think about as you're setting your joint planning and council agendas. So as Stephen mentioned, what we want to do is look at the 3 gateways that the town had identified earlier in its master plan and other planning functions, and also see how they connected to each other, both in a physical way and a thematic way. So one of the things we hope we see is complementary between the concepts between the 3, and you also see some recommendations. So the agenda is just the 3 things and what we hope to get out of it. What we did was look at development considerations for each of the areas, the character of the site, land use, traffic. You can read and this report, I believe, has been forwarded to environmental issues and regulatory issues, both to identify issues that could impact it and also give you some sense of a potential action plan to make hopefully some good things happen. So we started with the North Gateway, and it was interesting. One of the things we suggested and happily, I think everybody concurred, is the original focus of this was just to look at Main Street. We said that that whole quadrant really affects that corridor because of traffic and because of markets and stuff. So we broadened out the area to be that area you see highlighted in the slide. Again, I'll go through this fairly quickly, and then feel free to ask questions or slow me down if you'd like. One of the big issues there is soils. There's both hydric soils and there's floodways and wetlands. So those were identified early. We looked at what space was open and what wasn't, where there are large tracts of land, where there was existing parkland. Looked at traffic considerations. And if you see the map, the blow up on the left, you'll note that we're also highlighting that as this area develops, you have two potential bottlenecks that could develop if that isn't brought in, it isn't considered in the process. We wanted to look the issue of lot size. One of the things that makes this area hard to do a real thematic development is it's, if you can see on the top slide, it's made up of a lot of smaller lots. And some of the larger ones have some significant physical constraints, either wetlands on the west or hydric soils or slopes or conservation areas. So what we did was conceptualize it into areas. You'll see 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. And those were broken down further by if they were a development potential or a redevelopment potential going forward. And then we'll get to the point of the various multiple of ownership. So our preliminary recommendations on this one was to look at the D1 zoning designation and language, because some of the things that were envisioned bumped up against the language. Anticipate that this North Shore area is going to continue to have some development pressure. So think about some build out analysis so you could anticipate future traffic and other impacts. The next to the bottom one was probably one we spent the most time with the owners about, which is to have the town encourage, not take over or run or buy anything, but to encourage that the property owners would think about collaborative development schemes, because again, valuation and the quality of the developments along that strip are much better if they're developed in a coordinated way, in bundling parcels together, than if they're developed one by one by one. And then at the time, we were also looking at the RSA. There's a new incentive program, and recommending that at least that be considered. The West Gateway, you can see it on the map here.
Why am I still getting this?
Again, it connects. We're trying to keep the triangle, and it's also a B3 zoning district. Very different in that this is greatly underdeveloped. Again, environmental considerations, wetlands, floodways, aquifer areas. However, there are not, in far as the site we're looking at, there were not any significant environmental constraints, unlike the north area where you had both hydric soils and a lot of wetlands. There are a lot of wetlands to the west of the site, but the area inside the study area here, and the aquifer here are less constrained than some of the areas in the North Gateway. So then we started looking at land operations. First is ownership. Who wants how much on development? The browns are individuals and or undeveloped parcels. My internet connection is now unstable too. Okay. A couple parcels are owned by the town and some significant parcels owned by the state. So obviously we're looking at trying to assemble land to do better planning. One of the big things about this area is the lack of water and sewer infrastructure. What that does, amongst other things, is really encourage, if I can use it, the more sprawl. It encourages larger lots, lower density, more single-family lots, because you need both well and well protection.
Check 1, 1, 2.
You need septic field setbacks. And if you have water and sewer, you can do a lot more interesting planning and put density where it should be. And of course, your environmental impacts are better if you can run things through the municipal sewer line and utilize municipal water. So one of the things we looked at is where water and sewer infrastructure now exists. And you can see the key at the bottom. The water is pretty much almost there, and sewer has started, and we'll get back to the issue of water and sewer in just a second. Another one was to after we look at traffic, because you have this commercial traffic flow here and the residential flow here. We wanted to minimize the commercial shortcutting through here. Again, this is the project site that we might adjust the boundaries of B3 along Ash Swamp to sort of make sure that doesn't turn into commercial and continue to push commercial up here. Another thing is we'd like to look carefully at a tax increment finance district for the site. It's a longer conversation, but a tax increment finance district is basically an overlay district, a line on a map. It doesn't change your tax rate or the tax bill or anything. It's basically invisible to the property owner. But the new incremental tax revenues are directed to pay for any new public infrastructure. And so with that, the very first cut of this looked like if that site could be developed in a higher density manner, it would generate more than enough new incremental revenue to pay for those water and sewer improvements. But that was like a very first cut, but it would allow you to do a much better job of having the site have the setbacks and the amenities and the traffic controls than it would be if you, again, develop it parcel by parcel by parcel. So one of the things we looked at was sort of how the site might be developed as a whole. And I'm sure this is pretty hard to see, but what it does is down you wouldn't have as many go through the property for emergency vehicles and stuff. And we're showing a variety of mixed uses here, townhouses, cottage units, some rentals. Here is be shops, restaurants, amenities such as public facilities, ballparks and such. None of those would make sense if you divide it up by the existing subdivided lots, because each one of those would not support the other uses. So again, by having them considered as a whole, used as a whole, you can have a much higher level of improvement, much higher level of development space, and a much better planned project. So one of the things we want to help people with was give them some sense of what this sort of a mixed use thought project would look like. And by the way, post-COVID, I think all of these look a little bit even more attractive for the reasons because there's a lot of outdoor amenities and they don't require as much going into urban high-rise facilities as some driving into Boston or something every day. So it's a little bit early to tell exactly what's going to happen with the post-COVID real estate, but so far these sorts of facilities, these sorts of projects are actually, if anything, more in demand. One is the Point Place development not far away in Dover. We spent some significant time with people going over this and how it is or isn't similar. But you can see here, it has a whole variety of residential type of spaces, plus a lot of in-site amenities. So again, it requires less external traffic going on the major roads. And you can, again, a lot of open space, which is now that much appreciated than it was even a few months ago. because again, using the water and sewer, you can cluster your housing in ways that don't require such large septic and well set asides. Was in P City. It's not apples obviously because it's on a lake. This is not, but the acreage is pretty similar, and we thought the acreages for the different designations were about right. So you have some office, some single family, some restaurant, again, a lot of walking trails and paths, which are again in high demand. A Rock Road project in Portland was one we looked at also. Again, it's on the water, so that's not an exact comparison. But again, you can see what the mixture of uses does and why it keeps, number one, attracts higher end buyers and renters into the area. And also by providing those services on site, minimizes the off-site traffic for everyday use. You certainly would see these people come into downtown to go to restaurants and come to town hall and stuff, but they would need to come in every, twice a day to just do commodity shopping. The third gateway is the South Gateway. This is the entrance coming in from the south. And again, we did the same idea. We looked at the land uses existing and who owned what and considerations, and you can see the lots are larger. And there's also a mixture of uses. That one. We looked here for undeveloped properties, and most of them are on the east side, and you have some buildings here and the walkway, the rail spur that are all kind of interesting for working on a common theme for the gateway. Some of the development impediments, you have some tough land here, both because it's wet and it's steep. The railroad right away through here is, everyone knows how hard Pan Am is to work with. New road is a question of should it be upgraded or not. So you have some impediments, and you have some issues here with rights of way and such. So doing a little bit of the area context, here is the area again. We're just pointing out that in a path, traffic-wise, you're not far from Manchester, you're not far from downtown. And so if you, obviously right now, this rail line is going to stay active for quite a while, but there's the Seacoast Greenway, there's the Rockingham Bikeway that goes into Manchester, then goes almost statewide. So there's some really interesting potential connections to biking, hiking, some other outdoor amenities. So we put together 2 concept studies to see how they liked it. One's called Concept 1, and the other one's called Concept 1. I think one of those should have been called Concept 2. But the first one was a conventional subdivision, so that we didn't have to change zoning, and the second one was a little bit more interesting one, an ecotourism park. A conventional one would be, you use your 2 existing lots with their 2 existing zoning, B1 and B2. And one of the things we were suggesting was perhaps this could be because of its steep slope and its embankment, would not be very good for development. If you can see at the top right, that's a picture going on. I think when we estimated a road entering it, the road would end up like where the B1 is. It would take that long to get down to grade. So you really, you cut out almost all the usable land at site if you want to come off of the highway here, but it would work out well for something like a solar farm or other recreational things, which I'll show you in a second. But that does not require any zoning changes. The second concept is we're calling a multi-use recreational park. Again, we were doing this pre-COVID, and if anything, these sorts of amenities are much more in demand even than they were 6 months ago. But to utilize the terrain of the site and sites plural, to have a outdoor recreational area that would both service existing people and also be a real regional, not just draw, but also a brand for the community as being a natural resource haven. There are ecotourism park precedents. This is actually one that goes back to the beginning of my career years ago. This is the it's now called the Artisans Park in Windsor, Vermont, right across the river from New Hampshire. This is a former industrial park. This is the rail line, the Amtrak line. But some of you may now know it's Coombe Brewery is now. Simon Pierce has one and then a second distiller facility and showroom. And since then, you've had Great River Outfitters, Vermont Cheese, and a distillery all move into this former industrial park. And then on the east side of the elevated rail line, which you see here that they got an entrance now as a whole. You have farmland, but you also have actually a very popular walking park for people who come to visit. So this whole complex is a significant tourist destination now for a former industrial site. So this is the recreational park. What would go? Here's layout. Obviously going through this fast on purpose. Here are some other parks that are very similar, that are successful, that do bike parks or bike, snowmobiling, trailing, snowmobiling, or snowshoeing combinations. And high demand, high tourist attraction, and they really fit into the populations that would perhaps be interested in your West Gateway development and your downtown. And again, you can see the design is very unobtrusive. You take advantage of the land. You're not doing a lot of bulldozing. And it's, for people who are very advanced to those of us who are less. And one of the things I hadn't shown before is that it would tie into this whole recreational theme here. You have the golf course, the country club. You have a potential for restoring the historic railroad depot, a potential expansion of the trail system. You have an existing bike trail here. You have trailhead parking. You have car parking that's available here, I believe we said. I'm trying to remember where it was. So it would be we think of one of the things that's worth looking at for this combination of the two sites. I think, Stephen, with that being as fast as I could do it, I'll be happy to come up for air.
Thanks, Stu. I'll turn this back over to Tony to ask for questions.
Great, thank you. I'm gonna just.
You want me to leave it up, Chairman, or do you want to take it back?
You could take it down, only just so I can see the majority of people. Thank you. And does anybody have any questions for Stu?
No, that was fast, so.
This is Val Shelton. Stu?
Hey, Valerie, how are you?
Good, how are you? Thanks.
Nice to sort of see you again.
Nice presentation. Of the three gateways, which one do you feel would be the easiest to move forward with or focus on, given the market and our current infrastructure?
Probably the south is the easiest because it's happening. A lot of stuff is happening here anyway. The north requires a little bit of work to get the owners to be working together. The only concern I have with the south one is if it's going to take a little while to get people to sort of think about the park thing. You didn't ask me, but I would, if I could, the one that would have the biggest impact is the West Gateway, because it would be a somewhat of a transformative project. And I think it would also keep some other things from happening much less attractive.
Right, yeah, and that was going to be my second question, so thank you.
Sorry, I tried to jump ahead.
No, appreciate it. Thank you. In regards to all three, they will require zoning changes, correct?
I think for all three, we're suggesting you probably should. And I think we showed some options that you could get by without doing the zoning changes, but it's definitely harder. It's definitely, it's a constraint, but it's not impossible to do versions of south and north. But you wouldn't want to.
Madam Chairman, can I ask a couple of questions?
Please.
So thank you. That was, like Val said, that was a good presentation. My questions really relate to, say, the north, the lot sizing. My experience, I've never seen a bunch of landowners get together and do a development. It's always a developer that buys parcels and tries to combine them. Have you seen in the past where landowners have actually gotten together and actually did a development?
Perhaps I overstayed that. I would not suggest, although someone, the land who's an owner, I think our suggestion was more that the owners consider selling in a group and be able to present to a potential developer what could happen if they did want to assemble those lots. So it's more of getting the owners and to some degree the town thinking about encouraging that. But yeah, it would be a real leap for any of the owners, I think, to take that on themselves.
Okay, that's what I thought. My other question, and I don't know if you're the right person to answer this, on the south. I mean, I love the idea of the recreational stuff on the South Gateway. Is that something that will be, if it goes forward, as it goes forward, would be owned by the town on basically on the town property, the bikes and trails and all that kind of stuff? Would that be something that ultimately would be constructed and owned by the town? I don't see a financial return for a developer to do that. What's your experience with that, Stuart?
Yeah, I'm going to let Steve jump in here in a minute, because I understand there is some town land there and there's not, and there's right-of-way issues and stuff. Sure. But I think if the site was acquired and put together with the fairly low development costs that we're sort of talking about, those bike parks, showed you all those are profitable ventures.
Okay, I didn't know. I didn't realize that.
Yeah, if I think we've all heard the same COVID stories where everybody else has, that nobody can buy a new bicycle because they're all sold out. The long-term projection for people wanting to, what percentage of the time do you see being outside is kicked up? You have to presume some of that will dissipate over time, but most of the architects and stuff you'll see in the trade journals are building in much more open shared path, otherwise outdoor lunch rooms and stuff. So I think if anything, it's a little bit more viable than it might have been even when we were suggesting it before. And I could show you some numbers I don't have but the tourist dollars, the destination bikers, bicycle bikers, are typically fairly affluent and they spend money. So, be it at B&Bs or be it at hotels, they go to restaurants, they spend money. The average revenue per day is one of the higher tourist categories that comes to New Hampshire.
Yeah, and I'll jump in here. As you know, we own a good portion of that with the Wilson property. We are looking at doing a land lease for a portion of that for solar, but that would not impact any development out there. Before the pandemic hit, we did meet with some interested parties out there. There was some interest in, I don't remember the group's name, but there is a cycling group that would almost take it over to create the park. That is one option, but as Stu said, there's other options where, completely privatize that and, try to get the profit. We're not, as I always say, we're not in the business of owning land. We're in the business of taxing land. So anything we can do to get something back on the tax rolls is always better. But also, I mean, just to reiterate what Stu's saying, before the pandemic hit, the rail trail was a huge asset to the community and to the region as a whole. After the pandemic hit, the volume of people that have been using it got to the point where I think many of you know, we've had to issue tickets and put no parking because it was just overwhelming, people who wanted to use the trail. So I think there's definitely a market out there. I can also tell you that I know of a number of people who as far from Framingham up to parts of Vermont to use these parks because they'll do it on a day trip and bike around and then go out to eat and visit the community, then either stay the night or come back down. And I believe the closest park like this to us is somewhere in the Andover area of Massachusetts. Stu, was that correct?
My brain's spinning too. I think it's like that. Yeah,
Okay.
It was.
And my understanding is it's full all the time.
It was more than an hour, if I remember it, more like 2, if I remember.
Yeah, and I think that's. I mean, our thought was when we heard this, the benefits are one. I mean, we have we're in the Seacoast, so it's a pretty affluent area. We're on the rail trail, so people could get here from Manchester by bike. We're next to UNH, where we have a lot of students and a lot of professors who bike and use that. And we keep saying biking, but understand that trails are also used for running and in the winter snowshoeing and cross-country skiing. So this isn't just we're going to use it only for bike season. I mean, I know of a bunch of trail runners who are out there and they could use this for a road race. Or again, in the winter, you could use it for snowshoeing or cross-country skiing. I think it's just one of the things we do want to get out there. It's passive recreation. It's not for what North Country with ATVs and off-road vehicles. This would be passive and sort of make sure it's kind of quiet in the area too. Except for
do a non-motorized.
Right.
Do it. Just to go off a little bit, we're one of the groups we've been working with, and Steve, since we talked to you, is the city of Franklin. And if I were to give most of you a quick, what do you think about Franklin? You might say, I don't know where it is, or you might not say the nicest thing because it's a former industrial town. Well, and I didn't really buy into it, even though they are a client, until we spent some time doing some market research for them and stuff. They are about 80% on their way of turning themselves into a whitewater northeast destination attraction. There is a very real group that has been working on this process. They just got their DES permit to do it. And to make it even more interesting, whitewater rafting is a 12-month sport in the Northeast. Now, we'll have to remember that come February or something like that, but because it is a fast-running river, it doesn't freeze. And there are people who whitewater raft in any weather. But the projections from an independent third party were that Franklin, little 10,000 person city Franklin, would see about 150,000 new visitor trips a year from this one project. So it really surprised me, and it wasn't there. It was our economist we hired that gave us some numbers. So this natural resource thing really seems to be permanent, and if you're buying a $3,000 bicycle, you're spending a few bucks. Sorry, Steve, I cut you off.
Yeah, no, and just to go along with that, I don't know how familiar many of the people, the counselors and planning board members are with Franklin. Franklin is actually, it's smaller than 10,000. It's about 8,000, 8,500 people. We're about 2,000 people more than Franklin population. And Franklin is sort of jammed in between Concord and the Lakes region. And you're right, it's an old mill town. It was one of the plaintiffs in the Claremont suit, so it's a very property poor town, and they're trying to reinvent themselves. I think we're in a better position where just our location. We're close to 101, we're close to 95, we're close to Massachusetts. And I think you're more apt to get people coming up here for a day trip than you would be anyplace else.
And another connection is that a developer that I think you have heard of once or twice, Mr. Chinberg, is in the process of buying the very tired, it has bought the very tired mill buildings along the river there, and is pretty far along with about a $35 million upgrade to bring in 140 market and above market rate rentals. And again, our third party said he probably have them all rented out in the first 18 months. And that was pre-COVID, where you didn't have this rush on real estate. So and that's because they're right on the water, because they're right on the falls.
And one of the things to realize too, that people, the economy it's a weird situation right now because of the pandemic. You're having a lot of, you're hearing some restaurants and some businesses that are brick and mortar having a lot of issues. However, one of the things we're finding out too is that the quality of life factor, that they're realizing they can work at home, and companies are realizing that people can work from home. So people are tending to look, okay, do I need to continue to live in Boston, or can I work further away if the quality of life is better? So I'd be interested to see in a year or two, how many of the brick and mortar companies, what's the percentage of people go back in there versus work from home, or even the percentage of time they're there. So I think that's a very interesting thing. And I think that's what, I hate to say, that would be beneficial for us, is that people want to live for a little bit further away from Boston and look at our community.
And Stephen, smaller is more attractive right now.
Right.
But smaller with amenities is what everybody's really looking for. There's very little market. Well, there's some market for just going up on a dirt road in the middle of nowhere and living off the grid and stuff.
Right.
But most people are saying, where can I still get a good school system, go to restaurants, the hospitals there, there's 24/7 police, but I don't have to be in go up in an elevator for 32 floors back and forth 2 times a day. And
right.
I think small communities like, I think Newmarket are very well positioned.
And I think that's one thing, and just to segue a little bit into the West End section. Has anybody been to the, seen the new, the Point Place in Dover? I mean, that's what we would almost envision. It's almost, if you go out there, it's a little town. It has its own bank. It has stores, restaurants, financial institutions. It has everything it needs there. So you don't have the impact on the surrounding roads, but you still have the benefit of, a community, and they do partake in the community. And I think that's one of the things you need to look at the West End. People thought that, with the pandemic too, that a lot of these things, oh my God, nobody's ever going to move into them. I was able to tour the Orpheum with the owner of it. That's that new development in downtown Dover. It's almost completely rented out. The rents are not, they're fair market, which means they're high. I mean, that's what people are paying now. As well as they pivoted that the building has a restaurant, but it was also going to have storefronts. They realized storefronts would have an issue right now. So what they did was they created office space, and it's mini office space that people are renting, that they don't want to work in their home, but they can't go back to their own places. So it gives them a place to go, and they get the amenities of a large office, but it's almost like a little condo, single office spaces. And it's going gangbusters. They'll live somewhere else in town, or they'll live in the building, and then they just walk downstairs, go to work. They've got all the amenities of an office, like copiers, phone, conference rooms, gym, and they're just able to do that. So, again, if you would have asked me in February, March, when the pandemic hit, where we would be now, would not be where I thought we would be, because a lot of those things are still booming.
If I could just comment about the South piece, I've certainly had conversations with Steve and others. I love the recreation idea. I think that that's really important for the community. I think people want that. I think it attracts multiple and diverse groups, whether that's 55 plus or millennials and younger people. And I think that it's beneficial to lots of different age groups. The one thing I wanted to comment on is it's pretty far on the outskirts of town, and I think even now people utilize the rail trail and leave. And so if there was some connection, whether that's through New Road, but a connection to downtown, I spent a lot of time in Jackson, and it's great. There's a cross-country run throughout the town that they planned specifically to go throughout the town for development, to connect the different inns and to connect the different businesses. And if we miss that, it's really easy for people to come into Newmarket on the stratum edge of town and then go to Exeter or go to Portsmouth for dinner or to shop. So I wouldn't want to lose that when we talk about, those people having maybe more resources. I wouldn't want to lose those resources.
Exactly.
If we're talking about tourist dollars. Chris, there's no public comment right now. But hold on. Are there any other questions from the committee members? I'm not seeing any. I don't know if anyone has any. I mean, obviously, Mr. Hawkins has a lot of background and is on the zoning board. So if there's, I'm going to throw it out there. If there aren't any objections, to allow him to make some comments, whatever that may be. I'm not seeing any objections. So, Chris, if you want to go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I appreciate that. I know you're giving me a special indulgence, and I very much appreciate it. I'm rarely brief, but I'll try to be constructive. I think there's an opportunity here to accomplish, focusing on the South Gateway for a minute, to accomplish what the council is trying to accomplish and to do a lot more. Very consistent with the comments you've just been making, Tony, about tying things in. There was a concept floated about 20 years ago to flip 108 to the other side of the railroad tracks. You know that the railroad tracks, as you come over the bridge from Newfields, kind of diverge, right? One of them goes kind of north and south, and one of them heads off in the other direction. That there could be an opportunity there to build essentially a ramp and take 108 out behind where the Great Bay Athletic Club is now, bring it all the way up through what used to be known as the Black Bear TIF district, that big chunk of property that Lionel Labonte used to own between 108 and New Road, which is several hundred acres. A lot of it is wet, but much of it is developable as well. Bring the new 108, the rerouted 108 out north of the current location of the railroad crossing and essentially avoid the railroad crossing altogether. That would open up that whole area for development, a much bigger swath of land for development than the council currently has under consideration. The thought was that would also be a tremendous boost to the industrial park that's already there, make it even more accessible, and kind of take the railroad out of the equation. You could take the existing Route 108, turn it into a town road, and kind of reconfigure it to make it more bicycle friendly, because it would be much less trafficked than it is now, and make it more friendly for bicycles and other things. I don't know exactly whatever happened to the Black Bear TIF district. It certainly existed for a period of time. There were preliminary discussions with the state about this at the time. The most expensive portions of that project would be the intersections at each end. Kind of the middle part where you're just kind of paving a road would be relatively less expensive. And I think it's consistent with the idea of having your outdoor recreation and doing all kinds of other things, accomplishing. I know it's a big idea. It would be a big change, but I just throw it out there as something that we discussed a long time ago. It never really got off the ground, but it is an idea. I don't know if this is something that Stuart and Steve have considered, or whether it's worth considering. I just throw it out there for whatever it's worth. Because I think there are massive opportunities in that area of town, and to tie in an outdoor recreation facility with the rail trail, with our existing athletic facilities at that end of town, seems to make a lot of sense. And if you can open up more land for development, you can end up with a small hotel there. You could end up with all kinds, much greater flexibility in terms of your future planning. So I just throw it out there for what it's worth. Thank you I appreciate you giving me the time.
Thank you. Sometimes, those conversations from 20 years ago get lost. And so, you never know if those ideas have been explored, and maybe they were explored at the time and for good reason didn't happen. I mean, I don't have that history. But I think
I can tell you the history, but I don't want to bore you with it right now.
Maybe not tonight. So any other questions or comments for Stuart or for Steve?
Madam Chair, we'll be happy to dig that out and take a look-see and see how it might be able to integrate some of the thinking of that into thoughts going forward.
And what I'm taking from
all good.
What I'm taking from the boards and the council is that, we should move forward with more concrete plans on how to achieve this and recommendations, such as changing in zoning and other items like that. And, would propose any zoning changes to the planning board first, with review by the council after to make it the ordinance. Is that correct?
I think so.
Okay.
And I know we talked about this, it was about a year ago, and a lot, we went through a lot in the past 12 months. So I think we're definitely ready to take some concrete actions at this point.
Okay, Stu, so we'll meet soon and go to the next steps.
Great. And while let me just do this, just so people, I do exist. And I look forward to seeing everybody again. It's been a great town to work with. Special thanks to Diane and Stephen for being such good collaborators last year, and looking forward to and seeing more successes going forward. Thanks for having me tonight.
Thank you. And did we lose Eric? We lost him a little while ago, and he
had another meeting to go to. So
okay. I didn't know if it was a connection issue. So the next item on our agenda is for the discussion of the planning board and town council priorities for the upcoming year. So Steve, I'm assuming that was about our goals.
That's what I was taking. And so about a month ago, the chair, the vice chair of the planning board, and I and the town planner met to discuss, what does the council want the planning board to look at? And one of the things, and I'm going to use my words to sum up what I thought they were saying, is that recently there's been some proposals that come forward and they've been shot down by the council. So I think the planning board's a little gun shy. They want some buy-in from the council before making proposals. And I think that's what they're asking, is some guidance on where to go next. And Val, am I wrong there? Or did I misspeak?
No, that's exactly, that's really where we're at on the planning board. We don't want to spend a year and a half trying to develop zoning ordinance changes, only to have them brought before the town council to basically be almost rewritten. We just want to make sure everybody's on the same page. And also to understand what particular priorities there may be at the council level relative to zoning changes.
Right. So been quite a long time since we've had any real discussion between the boards on any specific items, I think. And it's always a little challenging because, our boards are constantly they change every year. And honestly, like this coming year, our boards could change pretty significantly. At least the town council could change pretty significantly. We've had 2 members who have recently been replaced. We have 2 brand new members now. Those people will be up for election in March, and then we have 2 other positions that will be up. So this could potentially be a big change year. And I just want to throw that out there because I think that's true every year. But so it can be hard to plan working on something that takes a year and a half to get underway, and then you don't know exactly what the council makeup is going to be. So I can say at this point, I think that we've had some discussions, and I can tell you what our, and anyone can chime in, please, but I can tell you what our vision is moving forward. And so some of that, I think comes from our goal setting session. And then obviously from presentations like this, because I think that this has been one of our goals for the last 2 years, at least. I mean, economic development has been a goal for much longer than that. But pretty specific around these plans for at least the last 18 months. So I think it's safe to say that we want to see some of the changes, some of the suggestions that I think will be brought forward through this plan implemented. I think that's.
So are you looking for the planning board to take the lead on that?
I think that's where we've been, yes. For any zoning changes.
If I may, with the group, Diane, me, Stu, and I come up with the next step and bring any zoning changes or recommendations to the planning board to let you review.
That's fine.
And I know that we had a subcommittee recently. That was for the impact fees. But I don't know if it would make sense for a subcommittee of a planning board and town councilors to look at some of these issues, or if we would just rather have the planning board kind of take it and then present it to the town council. I'm personally comfortable either way, but whatever makes sense for both boards. I don't want to put undue work on anyone.
So Steve, just to clarify, what I understood you saying was that you, Steve, and Diane would almost kind of be that preliminary committee to look at our current zoning relative to these particular gateways and making some recommendations as to what needs to be modified within the existing ordinances.
Exactly.
I think from there, then I think it should go through the public hearing process of the planning board. And then obviously then go town council.
Right, and that's my intention with the economic development budget for the coming year, is to use them as consultants to come up with those changes and ways to implement these. So it'd be a shared situation with the planning and council.
I think that would also be the most efficient way to do it, because a lot of times when we do try to pull together the joint departments, or not departments, but commissions or boards onto the committees, we're not as successful in expediting changes to the ordinances.
What's the old saying? What's the horse that died in committee is a camel?
Yeah.
Yeah. So that's the problem.
I think that's a great way for us to move forward, personally. Any other comments or feedback about that? I see some nodding. Great. So I'm not seeing anything else, so we can move on. Is that, if that's, the next item is floodplain management and stormwater. So,
Punt that to Diane.
yep.
These are actually both actions that are being mandated upon the town. For floodplain regulations, of course, we need to have minimum floodplain regulations that are approved by FEMA in order for the town of Newmarket to be able to have flood insurance for its residents. And of course, this is a program that's been around for a long time. And recently we have received some updated maps, and they have been vetted through a process, an appeals process. And they've told us that we need to make some modifications to our zoning ordinance and our zoning map, incorporating these maps into our overall zoning ordinance and land use scheme. And the time frame for doing this is very short. And the new maps are going to be official. I think it's the 27th of January. I can confirm the dates, but I just got some guidance from the Office of Strategic Initiatives, and they have a person who provides technical assistance on floodplain management. And we need to actually get those regulations to them by mid-January. And there are some, not only land use regulations, zoning and subdivision, which the planning board can handle at their level, some zoning changes and possibly building code changes that may have to be adopted by the town council. So typically the planning board has a planning process where we, we'll have a work session on regulations, we'll bring them forward for public hearing, and then make a recommendation and forward it to the council. And of course, the council has a 2-reading process. So we have a very, very short time frame to get those regulations in effect. And I've already asked a couple of planning board members if they'd be interested to work on this with staff. And Mikhail has offered to assist us. And we'd be looking for input from anyone else who would like to work at sort of a subcommittee level in developing these and putting them together and getting something so we can meet that statutory deadline. And that's a really critical one. We actually waited for like 6 years to get the maps to go through this appeal process, and they finally came forward this past summer with the actual maps. But so that's something that we have a mandate we have to do. The second thing is, as you know, we are now participating in the EPA MS4 program. And there is a component where we need our local stormwater regulations to meet certain guidelines to minimize the impacts of development, non-point source pollution, and the overall impacts on Great Bay and impaired waters in the town and in the region. So, and we do have a legal deadline on that, and that's contained within our MS4 permit. And the date for getting those adopted is June of this year. And we have, I know, Tony's rolling her eyes. We do have a draft that we've been working on. And of course, there was an appeal to the MS4 program. Steve can fill us in on the details of that. But right now, the EPA is in this sort of state of flux, waiting for some clarity, some new rule changes to implement those. And we're not exactly sure what kind of impact that will have on our local stormwater regulations. So everybody's in sort of this holding pattern to wait and see. But we are working, we really need to work towards getting those in a place where we can adopt them so we can meet that. It's actually a June 30th deadline. So those are two things that are imminent that we have to deal with, that are mandated, and these things, as Valerie can attest to, and some of the other board members, try to vet the process and have a lot of input from the public, and have copies made available to people and have weigh in to help build public support. So I just don't want to underestimate the time involved in doing that. And of course, this is something we have to do. So having said that, that's sort of the first priority that we have going forward as far as regulations that the planning board needs to tackle in the short term. Any questions on that?
I just have one quick, I don't know if it's a question or thought. When you mention, getting the, informing the community and getting kind of community buy-in, whether it's this, these issues, or when we talk about economic development, I'm certain we're going to need to get some information and some feedback from the community. And I wonder, maybe Steve or Diane, if either of you have, if there's been conversations through your professional connections about how to do that in this era. It's always hard to get, I think, to get people involved and to get people informed, but where, still there's so many, where there's fewer public meetings and just fewer opportunities to connect in. If either of you have any thoughts about that.
Certainly is a challenge. But there are other mechanisms. You could do surveys, opinion polls, and we've worked in the past with the UNH Survey Center, and they actually have student interns who do a lot of the polling and telephone calling for surveys. But there are mechanisms where you don't have to have direct contact. And also, we did this, Tony, you were involved with this when we did our visioning back in 2015, if you can believe that's been 5 years at this point. But we did, have an interactive program where we put information on the website and we got responses, and we were able to incorporate the feedback that we received from the public. And it was a really good tool, I think, that helped us set the framework for our visioning piece that followed that, our visioning statement.
And yeah, and I agree. I think that may be a good idea, is to do a whole visioning session for each of these when we do it. But one of the things people are finding out, and I know this is not a Newmarket situation right now, but a lot of communities are finding more people are participating because of Zoom meetings. They don't have to get in the car and drive down. So I'd be interested to see how a public hearing happens. I know the next few weeks, the New Hampshire Municipal Association is going to have their conference, and I think that's going to be one of the things to discuss. Okay. And another big thing that we're concerned about is deliberative session in the spring, and how do we hold that? So I think that's going to be a model to try to get people involved.
Great, thank you. I think it's important as we move forward. And I think about that visioning, those Saturdays, that we had, and that was really informative and so well run. And I think about that now, 5-6 years later. Those were great sessions. So I still appreciate that, Diane. So the next item, I'm just going to do a quick scan. Was there anybody? Oh, did I miss somebody? No. The next item on our agenda is the input on the next master plan chapter, which is housing, economic development, and recreation. Is that Diane?
Yeah. The master plan is really the legal basis, if you will. Or it's a blueprint for the future, but it's also a legal basis for our zoning ordinance. And the master plan and the zoning needs to be in sync. They can't be in conflict with one another, because that opens up the town for legal challenges and so forth. So, it's important that we have an up-to-date master plan. Right now, we did a complete overhaul of the master plan in 2001, which is eons ago at this point. And what we tried to do is every year update a chapter, every 18 months, update a chapter, so that it would become a more manageable task, because we're a small town. We don't have a large, planning staff, and we don't have resources to be able to go, to do something on a monumental scale. But we did, about 5 or 6 years ago, set up a revolving fund, if you will, or a capital reserve fund, so that we'd have some funding to do that. In the state statute, it says that we're supposed to be updating our master plan. And it's recommended every 5 to 10 years. And I think our town charter says 10 years. So we've been working and saving money so that in 2025, we can do some kind of a overhaul of the master plan. But meanwhile, we've been doing it kind of in a piecemeal, incremental basis. It's not ideal, because as you discuss these planning issues, you really realize very quickly that all these ideas and land use, transportation, and planning, they're all kind of intertwined and interwoven to be looking at things in a more holistic or broad way. But anyway, so every year we do a chapter, and many years we've worked closely with the Stratford Regional Planning Commission. They've done an excellent job for us. Of course, many of you may know Kyle. He's sort of been our point of contact with the Regional Planning Commission. And just last year, they worked with the planning board in updating a water resource chapter, which had been updated back in 2009. So, and of course, the town has made a lot of great strides in moving forward with water resource improvements. So anyway, so every year we go through kind of a process, a needs assessment, and we make a decision on what is the chapter that we want to tackle in the coming year. And Valerie, did you want to chime in on some of these things? We had a subcommittee, and I think Jamie, are you still here? Yes. We had a subcommittee last summer where we looked at all the different chapters, and we, made some recommendations or suggestions on what made most sense going forward. And I think it's always helpful to get feedback. And lately we've heard housing affordability is an issue that maybe we should be focusing on and looking at. And that's part of the ADU discussion that we had earlier. So I guess we're looking for some feedback from the community as to, what direction should we be heading in? I heard, Tony, you mentioned economic development. We also had said in an earlier plan that once this gateway project was completed, that we would revisit that and bring that into sync with some of the ideas that are articulated in that policy piece. So I guess I would just kind of open it up for discussion among the group here. What are your thoughts? What do you feel are the most critical issues for Newmarket going forward that we should be focusing on in the years to come? And, and we need to have obviously the resources to go along with that. But so I guess I would open it up for discussion if anyone wanted to chime in.
I just wanted to add to what Diane was talking about with the subcommittee we had. We were really looking to pull out several of the chapters that are extremely out of date and may be handled elsewhere with other departments in town. As an example, we have in 2001, the community facilities chapter was developed. It has not been updated since that point in time. It's really doesn't seem to be a high priority for the planning board to look at, but we think that the council and Steve's department is better, I think, oriented to dealing with community facilities. I concur with Diane. I think we really need to update the economic development chapter. A lot has changed. We talked about the Black Bear TIF that no longer exists. Things of that nature, and then really incorporating in the gateways from an economic development perspective. So that's, was last updated in 2011.
Yeah. Valerie, I have the sort of that spreadsheet that we put together when we had our committee. Would you like me to see if we
I think that's a great idea, just so the council members can see all the current chapters in the master plan, which drives.
Could you share the screen with me? Or I guess I need to, I have it on my, well,
you can share, you can use it.
Okay. So I go to share screen and I hone in on the there it is right there. Share. Can you see that? You can, good.
Yeah,
okay.
Perfect, thank you.
Yeah, so anyway, this is what we kind of used as our workshop at our subcommittee. And it lists all the chapters that we currently have, and some of them are optional and some are mandatory. Under the state RSA, the visioning statement is a mandatory chapter, as is land use, existing and future land use. And there's a whole list of other things that communities can include in their master plan, giving community needs and the community views our policy issues. And so this is what we came up with, and, just asking, is this something we want to update? Well, this year we updated the water resource plan, so that's our most recent. But some of these others, community facilities was done in 2001. There is, I think I can move the screen up a little better. Another one that hasn't been updated is the historic preservation and cultural resource section. And, many of these chapters, it's driven by what funding is available through various sources. And of course, we're part of the coastal region, so we have access to a lot of coastal zone management money, and we're able to use it for things such as climate change and natural resource planning. So anyway, and then there's some new chapters that we included here. You can see one that Tony, your committee would be interested in. Energy could be a chapter. I know a lot of communities have. Let's see if I can make this a little smaller so I can move it. Forgive me for not zooming in. Oh, the other way. I'm not going to go. But energy, and then we have a chapter that's implementation, and that actually can be consolidated in all the chapters of the master plan. It doesn't have to have a standalone chapter for itself. So anyway, these are the types of things that, are of interest or could be done. And I just, we're looking for some feedback. And if you want to give us some thought and get back to us with your ideas or suggestions. We usually make a decision at one of our first or second meetings in the year. We're just about ready to wrap up the water resource plan, so that should free up some time for us to focus on some of the other areas. One that hasn't been updated for a while is the open space and conservation plan that was originally done. The last time it was done was 2006. That could be a likely candidate. And transportation hasn't been updated for a while in community facilities. So anyway, that kind of gives you a flavor of the types of chapters that we could be engaged in as part of our master planning update. Does anyone have any questions?
Do you think you could send that to us?
I certainly can. Yes, I'd be happy to. And we can work from there. And if you have ideas, let us know.
Does anybody have any thoughts or questions, comments right now that they want to share? Not seeing any. Okay. So I'm scrolling through people. Okay. So if you have your hand raised or something, just speak up. Okay, I'm not seeing any. So we can plan to take a look at what spend a little time with it, and then get back to you with any questions. I personally think, the economic development is it's almost the perfect time to be talking about that. Housing, there's so many, it's probably, there are a lot of, transportation. So there are some important topics for sure.
All right. So I will get copies of this to everyone, and I'm going to stop sharing now and go back to the full screen.
Thank you.
Oh, you're certainly welcome.
So the next item is impact fees.
Valerie, do you want to talk about that?
Yes. So we were before the council several years ago with recommendations as to impact fees. And our primary recommendation was to extinguish the impact fees relating to water and sewer and have those go over to the town council as system fees, so that you're less constrained as a town as to the collection of those fees and the use of the fees. And it will take a lot off of our plate as a planning board as to people coming in and requesting waiver of those fees, which we get a lot. And then we're kind of, we've got a mixed board as to whether or not we believe that we should extinguish all impact fees, the other two being the schools and then recreation. So our board is fairly mixed on that. We're looking for some direction on the council. We do understand that even though we have raised and appropriated money for the new schools, we can still collect impact fees to relief towards the bond relief there. The recreation department's a little different. We seem to be collecting impact fees, not really sure how those are appropriately spent as to new and expanded capital projects, because that's what the fees are supposed to be used for. The town does an excellent job at accounting for the fees and recording them and the expenditures. But with our impact fee ordinance is extremely out of date, and it's quite expensive to update that and to really solidify within the ordinance the right to collect those fees and the amounts that they were based upon, the actual fees themselves. But whether or not the town council would agree to just extinguish the ordinance or not, I mean, that's up for discussion. As I say, we have pretty much a split planning board on that. And then, but certainly we'd like to pursue the idea of systems charges and get rid of the impact fees on water and sewer.
And system charges come under a different statute, so there's more flexibility, and they can be handled administratively by a town department, for instance, the water and sewer department. And they're on all the caveats that go along with them, as there are with impact fees. For instance, we can't hold the impact fees for over 6 years. If we do, we have to then return them to the developer. And that could be problematic. But we have a fairly sophisticated system, but it does require maintenance, and it does require to be updated. And we've been fortunate that we haven't had any appeals to any decisions that the boards have made over the years with regard to impact fees. But I think, it would behoove the town, if you are to continue with impact fees, to do the update that's necessary to kind of protect us from any future liability that there might be, having not updated them since 2002 or 3, I think is the time frame. And we did ask a consultant for a cost estimate. Jonathan, do you remember what the dollar amount was? I was going to say it was about $30,000 to do a complete overview, to update the system, and to do all the statistical analysis and cost estimating that goes along with it. So, I mean, it is a fairly hefty dollar amount. But, if we are going to continue in this vein and continue to charge impact fees, then it would be in our best interest to update those regulations, or not the regulations, but the act, that's part of it, but the actual basis for the regulations.
Or the ordinance.
And the ordinance, sure. And we did send a letter off to the council. I think it was last May, maybe April. Maybe it was before the new council came on board, but there was a recommendation that had been drafted based on input from the full planning board, and Eric Bodeman had signed that. I don't know if there's still, if that's something, we do have a subcommittee that Jonathan was involved with, and Christian Matthews was involved with. So maybe a workshop in the future might be in order to further discuss this.
Yeah, I think that was right before we stopped meeting, and so I think that was right around that time. I think it's safe to say it got lost.
Postponed.
So that would be a good jumping off point for us. Steve, is that?
No, that sounds fine. I agree.
Okay.
And hopefully after our meeting next week, we will again have, because I know Christian was the rep, the town council rep to the planning board. So we will have another rep to the planning board.
Madam Chair, Councilor Kuiper has raised his hand.
Oh, I'm sorry.
I can see it, you can't.
Oh, sorry. About the impact fees, that it seems pretty straightforward to take off the wastewater treatment water portion of the impact fees. I don't know if anyone had ever considered an alternate form of, perhaps like a construction excise tax or something that would be a little bit easier to spend, I guess, than an impact fee. I don't know. That was just something I researched when we were discussing getting rid of the impact fees altogether. If there was not another replacement that, I don't think anyone wants to collect money right now. In the grand scheme of things, I don't know if our budget, if we want to be saying that there's money we want to leave on the table. So I don't know if there's a replacement for impact fees.
Statutorily, there's not a lot of, sorry, Council, there's not a lot of tools statutorily that we can use. So that's unless the legislature changes something, we're using what we have.
Okay.
So maybe I misunderstood, but is that sort of what changing at least for the wastewater, for the water, changing that to a system fee?
That's allowed.
I think there was a unanimous feeling of the planning board members that that's the way we should go with the water and sewer charges, and that the water department or Department of Environmental Services would be the appropriate entity to administer those under the statutes that are already in place for that. And it would provide greater flexibility.
But there's nothing like that for school and recreation. Is that correct?
Yep. That I'm aware. And I'm not aware of any RSA enabling us to have an excise tax on construction. But we do, the planning board does negotiate offsite improvements, which is another way to capture, to address growth demands into the future. So there are other options that we are already employing.
So right now, to move forward, we can act on or review and potentially act on the letter from the planning board.
Yes.
Spring. And then pursue the system charging.
Correct. But I would ask the Environmental Services Director to come up with a plan for that.
Definitely.
And I would just comment that we would want to be doing that basically concurrently with the amendment to the ordinance at the same time that you would be doing the system development fees and adopt those, simultaneously. Because you want to put those on the books, but you don't want a developer to be paying both fees.
No.
Right.
It would be in lieu of the fee that's currently there.
Any other further comments on that? Okay.
Madam Chair, I think the next two we've already kind of discussed. So we can skip those.
I think so. So then detached accessory dwelling units is the next item.
Who's going to take that one on?
I'll let you, Diane.
Oh, okay. As Mr. Hawkins had pointed out, we do have an accessory dwelling unit ordinance in place, and it requires that it applies only to attached units. It does not apply to detached units. And we have received some input from the public. We had a few members of the public come forward at a public meeting a couple of months ago ask the planning board to consider detached accessory dwelling units. And that is an option. And I guess there's a feeling that it's an issue that really needs to be carefully studied. I'd agree with Mr. Hawkins on that score. We don't deal with unintended consequences, and we should really fully understand what the impact of changing that would be in terms of additional growth in units, housing units in the town, and understand whether or not this is really, in the best interest of what the town wants to do. So I agree that it shouldn't be just a casual decision. One person had just mentioned, we could just arbitrarily just change the word and say, yes, we will allow detached as well as attached units. And it would be my recommendation as a professional planner that we not do that, because that's rather arbitrary, and that we should be looking at the impacts of it. And I've watched all these zoning hearings, and I've seen 2 or 3 applicants get turned down. And, sometimes the process can become contentious and onerous. There are instances where I feel that there should be opportunities for detached units in some of the more rural areas of the town where we have our low density zoning, and you could tuck in a little unit in the back 40, if you will, without even knowing that it's there. And, I personally don't have a problem with that. What I have a problem with is just doing a wide scale change and say, oh, we want detached units in every residential district in the town. I don't think that would be in our interest. So we would have to carefully plan this and look at it and get input. And we've heard reoccurring from the planning board that we need input from the public. We heard from a handful of people. We received a couple of letters, and I believe the town council has received a letter from one of the citizens as well. So I think it's a great idea that we go forward with this. But I guess in light of some of the other priorities that we have going forward with the Gateway project and some of these mandates, that, is something that maybe is not a immediate goal that we go forward with, and could be a longer range goal, maybe something that we tackled after some of these mandates were cleared from our plate, and we were able to move forward with the Gateway project. And those are kind of my thoughts on it. So does anyone have any questions on that? Yes. Tony,
Oh, sorry. Yeah, Councillor Sanders.
I just want to make a quick comment. One of the things I've seen that is now out there, and I don't know how often it would be brought up by someone in the town, there's something called granny pods that would take the loved one in a nursing home. They are detached, they're mobile, they're set up in a person's backyard or side yard. They are tied into the existing septic and water and electric, and offer 24-hour monitoring for the family inside the home to keep an eye on Nana or Papa that are in this granny pod. It's a lot cheaper than putting a loved one in a nursing home. And I think after everything that happened in nursing homes with this pandemic, I think a lot of people are getting a little nervous about putting their loved ones in a home. So I think we ought to at least give some thought to whether that would be considered an accessory dwelling unit, or where it's temporary, it wouldn't be, but just something to keep in mind as we go forward.
Definition is right now that it has to be a permanent facility on a permanent foundation.
Okay.
I know some communities have certain homes that actually have wheels, and you can move them from place to place. And I'm not sure. And this is something that requires quite a bit of research, and whether it's something that we embrace as ideas. And I'm certainly open to look at all different options. But I don't think we should do it hastily. I think it does.
Oh, absolutely not. But I just wanted to mention that is something that someone might ask.
Interesting concept, Helen.
Councillor Kuiper?
I think from my perspective, and maybe the many of the people who, and I have spoken with probably half a dozen over the years who have run into this problem, it just seems a matter of fairness and sort of arbitrary to say that an attached garage is allowed and an unattached garage it's not allowed. So I think that's why it's something that I think should be a slightly higher priority than maybe the gateway. Because again, I don't think there's a ton of people that, as has been stated, there's not a ton of people requesting this change. I don't think it would really, be that drastic of a change. And I think there's many municipalities in this town that allow non-attached accessory dwelling units. And I feel like we should make it a higher priority because I feel like for the people who are told no, it's very frustrating. And particularly for people who are elderly and trying to age in place, if you're trying to build an apartment in your garage so that your, child can take care of you as you get older, it's very frustrating when you're told no. And the reason that you're told no is really, it's an ordinance that I don't really understand why an attached garage would be not allowed. And, it just doesn't make any sense to me. I mean, I understand the density issues, but the fact that this town become more dense over the next 30 years, and there's not really, this town's going to change, and that's kind of just it's with the nature of living in New England and living in a town, an area that's a growth area. So I personally would like to see it be a higher priority than the gateways, because the gateways sound like something that might be 5 to 10 years out, where this seems like something that people for the people that it is an issue for, it's a higher priority than really something like that.
Well, just to comment as well, as far as priority for some people, the reason that the state legislature adopted the ideas of accessory apartments and accessory dwelling units was to provide landowners and taxpayers with additional options to be able to, have income producing use of their properties, as well as the idea of accommodating family members, whether it's an aging parent who might be moving out into the accessory apartment or a new dwelling like a granny pod, and the kids are, taking over the main home. So if you really read the statute and the intent of that, and there was a lot of the State House before this, before this was adopted, and it was a very high priority of the state. We did have a recommendation when the planning board was before the council on 2 times ago, that we wanted the detached structures as well. That was shut down by a prior council. And then we had a split planning board on the last update.
That's true. When was that town council? Can I ask a question, Valerie? What year was the town council? This was before I've been on board for 15 years almost now. And it was never something that the town council directly spoke about at a policy level. So do you know what year that was? I'd like to go back and revisit some of the issues and some of the discussion.
Yeah, I can pull that out, Diane. Yeah. I can definitely pull that out, Diane, because we actually were at that time, we had a subcommittee and we were reviewing all of the other town ordinances regarding accessory structures in the Seacoast area. So I know I have that. I can pull it out and get that for you tomorrow.
That would be great. Thank you.
Yeah, I think that would be helpful for the council also, maybe to get some background information. I know, like, I vaguely remember some conversations from years ago, not at the council level, but just when this was before the planning board, with concerns about, when this was adopted at the state level and then brought to the planning board, some concerns about density and concerns about what the potential might be for and impacts to schools and whatnot. So I think that those considerations, to understand sort of some of the background would be helpful for everybody, and the arguments on both sides.
Yeah, we can put that together.
And right now, is it still sort of a split planning board on this issue, or where does the planning board stand?
We really didn't want to dive back into it and put the time until we really heard what the council was looking for. Because again, we didn't want to we didn't want to spend a lot of energy, time, and effort, and particularly with our planners' time because of other higher priorities, if it was not a priority of the council.
Right. Understood. And again, it's one of those things where the council could change pretty drastically by the time, and we could say one thing today, and by the time something was in front of the council, it could be a very different council in just a few short months. So I know that personally, and just as far as priorities go, I think that the gateways are, for me, definitely a higher priority, because I think that I think that the difference is that the people who would want a detached accessory dwelling unit, it's really, really, really important to them, I'm sure, and to those half a dozen people who have maybe come before the planning board or looked for variance, but the impact that the gateway projects would have on the larger community is, I think, much, much bigger. So just from my point of view, even though it would take, obviously it's going to, because both items are going to take a lot of work. And the gateway projects are going to be pretty significant. Just one gateway project, never mind all three. So, but I just think that the impact to the town is much more significant. Any other comments?
I just wanted to say one more thing. I don't think it should really be the ADUs or the gateways. You know what I mean? I just think the gateway's like probably a longer term thing, and the ADU doesn't necessarily need to be. I think there's some research that needs to be done, but I don't think it's quite the same thing. I think we can walk and chew gum.
Great, I'm not seeing any other comments or any other hands raised, so I will move on. And the M2A district is the next item on the agenda.
We have a M2A district that was modified 4 or 5 years ago, and there's some issues with it. Including that within that district, anyone who wanted to get a parking variance would have to get a parking waiver, would have to go to the Zoning Board of Adjustment and get a variance, which administratively is burdensome, both for the developers as well as the staff to administer that. And just a few things that are included in that ordinance that we may want to reconsider. I don't think we do have a couple of projects that are in that zone that are coming before us. So we may have to make some modifications to address some of the administrative aspects of it. And I know we talked about it briefly at one of our planning board meetings recently. I don't view it as a high priority, but something that we should take a look at and maybe make some modifications too.
Again, just a comment on that. That's another example of the planning board bringing an ordinance to the council and then having it modified. So we need to come up with some better process that the planning board's not spending literally sometimes a year to 2 years in developing of an ordinance and going through all the public hearings to bring it to the planning board, to the council, and then within maybe 1 or 2 meetings, having it very much changed. So we've got to figure out some better process. whether or not the council is involved early on in the review and development of those ordinances, so that we're, again, we're not putting in a lot of effort and time in developing the ordinances.
And I agree, but I think that's partially what one of the roles of the counselor on the planning board is supposed to be, is to bring that message back to the council. You can't legally, as the legislative body, you can't have the council approve something before it gets to them. They have to have the ordinance and the public hearings and the readings. I mean, the planning board could go through the process and the council agrees with it, but all of a sudden, say a neighborhood hates the zoning change, they may vote it down. And it's not because of anything different. It's just because of, they have their own constituency. But I think the communication there has to be from the planning board member to the council when we have committee reports explaining what the ordinance changes are, what's the importance. And Val, I remember that completely, that, it was changed so much, it wasn't the same what the planning board proposed. But I think it's one, that's the right of the council. And I think the council should give the courtesy of sometimes either just voting up or voting down and not trying to change it so much that it's not what it is.
Can I ask for just a little bit of history? Because I don't, so what, I mean, maybe I'm the only one who isn't sure what the M2A district is. And because I don't recall this, it's probably before my time on the council. Maybe.
I think it was right when I started in Newmarket. It was in my first year.
So probably right before my time.
I believe so, Tony. We worked very long and hard on it. We had several visioning sessions with the neighbors and property owners, and we had different proposals, and we scaled it back quite a bit. And at the end of the day, I think the planning board felt really comfortable with what was being proposed, and it ended up that there was a new zone. The M2A zone was created as sort of an offshoot of it, with these new requirements that made it even more difficult. Mixed-use housing in the areas where we were hoping to encourage mixed-use development. And it's problematic the way it's written now. It's too restrictive. That's my opinion. And
I agree.
I think,
be that as it may, I mean, it really needs to be looked at with an eye to how do we make it work better, and is it really consistent with the master plan that's in effect and what we have for a common vision for those areas.
And tell me where the M2A district is.
Includes property that's south of Rite Aid. I would have to give you a map, Tony, but it's an extension of the M2 zone and the business zones, and an extension of the downtown. And it was an area that was viewed as being an appropriate place to have further mixed-use development on the fringes of the downtown, so that there'd be an opportunity for expansion. Okay. And I could give you a map and make that available to you.
in general, Tony, from the railroad tracks up to the car wash, that section. The idea was to expand the downtown for urban infill. The ordinance that was designed by the planning board, we thought that that was economically viable to have zoning that would facilitate that. We've had two developers or property owners come before us that have plans approved, but they just have not been economically able to develop those.
Okay, thank you. Now now it rings a bell. You guys work with the zones all the time, so it's it's sometimes a different language for other people.
To be honest, I'd be interested to see what would happen if it was brought back up. Just because of the change in the economy and in the philosophies of development in the last 10 years or 8 years. I'd be interested to see what happens.
agree. And again, that leads to, what I had said earlier, like the councils are constantly changing. I think about the council when I first started and just before I started and the philosophies probably and the mindset of the council at the time and to where we are now, I think is very, very different. So, that kind of is at the end of our agenda. There's an other, if there are any other items that people wanted to bring up and also, an opportunity for any closing comments. I'm seeing none. So I will just say thank you to everyone. I feel like this was really productive and probably even maybe one of our more productive joint meetings. It's just, I think we have a lot to talk about and it was nice to see so many items on the agenda. And I do think that we have an opportunity to really move some things forward. And I think that we will. So I'm hopeful that we will, for sure. So one last call for any other comments. And seeing none, thanks everybody for your time. Congrats again to Councillor Dumont. And we will see you soon. I'll consider us adjourned. Thank you.